Hi, everyone. I am really happy to be talking with a beautiful lady today called Jenny Blyth. And Jenny is a long time, for nearly 40 years or 40 years, birth worker, birth educator, and a body worker for mamas who are wanting to have a more natural and conscious birthing experience and pregnancy as well. So thanks, Jenny, for joining me. I'm really, really honoured to be interviewing you.
Thanks,
I
Tara.
yeah, I
So
didn't.
lovely to see you. Yeah.
Yeah, you too. So just a bit of a backstory. I was lucky enough to have Jenny as my midwife for my first home birth, which was actually my third child. That was over 18 years ago now, and Jenny cared for me and Liam and the family, and it was just a really beautiful experience to have that. And because I had such a beautiful experience there, I went on and had two more home births, and it's changed me forever. Working with you, the knowledge that you exposed me to, and even the community of people that that you introduced me to, it did really just change the trajectory of our life. So forever grateful for that. So
Thank
yeah. All
And
right.
the, and the
Well,
and the great side of it for me is that I get to work with people like you.
yeah, thanks. Well, all right. So we've just got a few questions today. And I just wanted to first start with you, if you wanted to just share a little bit about yourself, what sort of caused you to be drawn to working in that sort of conscious birthing, home birthing space all those years ago.
Yeah, well, it was kind of an organic process for me, but I um, I became pregnant with my first daughter, and started to question where I wanted to give birth, and I really hadn't known very many children. I mean, I came from a big family, but I hadn't really been hanging out with kids very much. So it was suddenly being like almost like thrown into a new dimension, having to think about all of that. And even though I planned to have a home birth, which is a long story and I won't get into it here, but um, I ended up giving birth in hospital, not because there was anything extraordinary going on. It's just that the people that were supposed to be looking after me in birth were all away for Christmas, and my daughter decided to come just before Christmas instead of in the new year. So
Right.
in those days, your GP could just pop into hospital and support you. And I'd had a fantastic GP who had been very supportive. And when I called him and said, what'll I do? Because the friend's house we're hanging out at don't want me to birth here. He said, I'll just pop into hospital. And we'd never discussed that option. And I just went, oh, okay. So I popped into hospital. And by the time I got there, it was, I was nearly fully dilated, and it was
Wow.
very intense. And I remember thinking at that time, even though he was acting normal, came in his board shorts, um, and Warren was there, my partner, and there was a midwife there, and they were all kind of acting like, oh, this is all just pretty normal. Internally, I was feeling like, oh my goodness, this is just so much more intense than they talked about in spiritual midwifery, they talk about the rushes.
Yeah,
And
right.
and and I remember thinking, like afterwards, if that midwife had just turned to me and held my hand and looked at me in the eye and said, I know this feels really full on, but this is how it is, like you're doing great kind of thing. So they were all acting like it was all great and normal, but I
Mm,
needed that reassurance because, yeah. But anyway, I got through it and I felt really, really powerful and really empowered, but I was really blown away by not only the intensity of the experience, but the whole parenting thing of like, wow, you just don't really think about it that much until you're in it. And it's just this massive rite of passage. And
yeah.
it's so incredible, like so hard, but so phenomenally joyous in so many ways, just blows your heart right open. And because I was in a community where there were a lot of new families and they were, sort of starting to have babies, and I was already a body worker, I was a qualified body worker,
Right.
I started just thinking, oh, I just want to go and hang out with these women and just talk to them about, what are you thinking about doing and where are you going, and offering them some massage just to help them feel more comfortable, because I felt like even though I was a very self-sufficient person, it was that thing of, you know, just feeling through my birth experience that, wow, that little thing of having good company and having somebody just normalize the experience for you would have been an extra bonus, even though I felt really good about my birth. And so it just went from that to being invited to come along, and I wasn't, you know, encouraging anybody to do anything one way or the other. But I also had a dear friend who had 6 babies, and I was at 5 of her births, and she birthed at home. And even though she'd engaged a midwife in those days, there's no pages.
Right.
There's nothing. So it was just luck of the draw whether, you know, you get hold of her, and we never got hold of her. So I got that experience of being with my friend 5 times without the midwife coming.
Wow. I think I might know who that is. Wow, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, and then having 2 babies of my own at home, unassisted, without anybody medical there. So it just kind of went from there. So I just in those days assumed it was okay to be at someone's birth if they invited you to come along, which it was really, and it still is, and that's just how it happened.
Yeah.
But I think I decided to just stay with that. At different times I thought about, you know, going and getting a qualification, becoming a doctor or a midwife, but I thought, no, I have more freedom this way, and I'm actually really largely more interested in the non-clinical aspects of birth, which were things that I felt were missing from standard maternity care.
Yeah, very much so.
You know, and coming from a bodywork paradigm, you know, I just wanted to be in that space where I'm actually really connecting with people on a physical level, but also on a relationship level, just being tender in care.
Yeah, awesome. Wow, what a journey you've had.
Yeah.
So from your experience then, when a mother sort of chooses to plan for a natural birth, what does that mean? Is that different? Is there a different interpretation for women, or does it?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think there generally is in society. So if I was going to work with somebody, mostly it were people that were going to be birthing at home. I've rarely done hospital support just because I haven't needed to, but I have done enough hospital support that I understand what goes on in hospitals. But yeah, so for the people that were working with me, basically they would be wanting to have what they call a natural birth, which means they don't want any clinical interventions, which means they don't want to have the drugs available because they either don't want them or they know that they would ask for them if they were in a clinical environment.
Yeah.
And they don't want the regular kind of assessments that are done on a clinical level. But at the same time, they just want somebody there that maybe has a bit of experience in what's normal and what's not normal, and somebody that can show them some first aid skills around what to do if, you know, they need a little bit of help after the birth, or the baby needs a little bit of help, or whatever. But from a social perspective, natural, but you know, the word natural has become sort of overused, and it's an interesting question because it could mean to a lot of people natural birth would just mean the baby comes out of your vagina.
Yes.
But you may still have an induced labour, and you may still have an epidural, and you may still have an episiotomy or whatever, but you know, the achievement is birthing vaginally. So, but I kind of break it down and I go, well, there's vaginal birth, and there's vaginal birth with interventions, and there's vaginal birth with no interventions, which you would put more in the natural birth category. And then there's now a movement of, you know, people who are doing what they call free birth, which I would call medically unassisted birth. But the thing about free birth is pretty broad definition, so it can range from people that just want nobody else present, so they just want to have a really instinctive, or what they call a wild birth, where nobody's saying anything to them or offering them anything except maybe their partner.
So it's very intuitive. They're just really trusting their...
Yeah, or it could mean that they have somebody there with experience, but there's nobody with medical qualifications there. So there's kind of like a lot of broad definitions, and now they're even coming up with terms like natural cesareans, which means it's somebody who needs to have a cesarean section, but they want to make the most of it by keeping the placenta attached to the baby and having the baby put on skin to skin straight away.
Right.
So they're calling natural.
Right. So they're bringing in those aspects that would normally happen in a natural birth, but yeah,
it's kind of making it more natural, I suppose, than it
yeah,
would be otherwise. But it's clearly not natural. It's surgery, so you know,
yeah.
it's kind of odd, really. Yeah, yes, but
All right.
yeah, really the definition of, and Rachel Reed, who's a really brilliant researcher and she lives on the Sunshine Coast here, she's a midwifery educator, she kind of breaks it down and says, look, physiological birth, what we now call physiological birth, is birth with no interventions whatsoever. So it's like the instinctive process.
Mm-hmm.
And then anything that's offered or done with the birthing woman or to the birthing woman through that process is an intervention. And that's kind of quite confronting to think about that. And it's not wrong. Like, women have always been supported in birth, but I think we've come to have very negative connotations around the word intervention, whereas interventions can actually be quite positive and they can be very natural, naturally based interventions like touch or homeopathics or herbs or, you know, helping them reposition or something like that.
Right. I didn't realise that they would class that as an intervention, but okay, rather than you know, working with.
Yeah, well, I now, when I teach now, I'm so intrigued by this. I've been trying to get my head around it for years, but now I talk about, anything that you offer or is requested that's not just purely instinctive birth where nobody's involved and the baby just falls out and the mother picks up the baby, and then you might help her get into bed and feed her. You know, it's like that's without intervention. And it's got a little bit of interaction, but I now talk about, well, you can still be offering interventions, but the way that you offer them is interactive. So interventions are doing to somebody, but interacting is working with somebody. So, and it's very important for hospital-based midwives to hear this, because quite often they're having to give clinical interventions and they feel terrible about it. Like, they don't like the fact that they're having to stick needles in somebody and do kind of things that are pretty yucky.
Interfering.
So I talk to them about, look, if that's what you have to do because that's what's being requested or consented to, if you do it with tenderness and you do it with love, you know, knowing that even though you have a judgment around it and you might think it's not necessary, that whatever you do with love. It's like you're offering this intervention, but you're interacting while you're doing it, which means that you still get to connect with someone rather than kind of like, ooh.
Yeah, I have to do this. So yeah, that's beautiful, Jenny. Yeah. Actually, when you think about it, there's probably a lot of mums who've had to birth instinctively without any offerings when they've, I know of a lady who had a baby driving to the hospital in the car, you know, on the side of the road. Enough. And we've got another friend who was outside and it all just happened so quickly for her that you didn't make it. Or, you know, like there was only like, a husband there. So it's, you know, so that, I guess it can happen. That happens. So.
Well, that's right. I always say to people, like, it doesn't matter what you're planning for your birth. It's actually a really good idea to be well prepared and understand the process of birth and understand some basic first aid, because what you're just describing happens often enough. And if you're somebody that has planned to have an epidural and C-section because you're like, oh, I don't want to go through labour, or because somebody's told you that that's what you must have considering your, you know, health conditions or blah, 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 and suddenly you find yourself pushing your baby out in the bathroom and your mobile phone's in the bedroom and you can't even get to it, or there's no reception, or you're on the side of the road and there's no reception. The last thing you want to be doing is panicking and putting all your energy into trying to work out how you're going to contact somebody. You need to really pull your resources in and stay focused and go, well, if this is what's happening, it must be good, you know? And once that baby's out, you would find a way to get to your phone if you needed to, even if there was something a little bit not quite right happening. But, you know, it's like so important to do that. And then the other side of that is important, that you could, in your heart of heart's desire, want to have a natural birth, vaginal birth with no intervention, but it doesn't turn out that way. You know, you have to think about that, you know, well, you don't have to, but I think it's really advisable through pregnancy to think about those those possibilities that, you know, to
Yeah.
keep your focus and your visualization and your intention clearly on what it is that you think that you want and need in order to feel secure and safe, but be prepared to deal with birth if you have to. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, that's pretty much answered the next question that I had around that. So what a woman can do, you know, that was that had planned for that, but changes for some reason beyond her control. So
Yeah,
yeah.
well, sometimes things change in the pregnancy, and
Mhm.
you know, that's really tough, but you've got more time to come to terms with it. And if you've also got more time to get some support on board to help you process what you're actually going through. If things take an unexpected turn in pregnancy, it's a little bit harder in birth if you're suddenly, you know, you go into birth and you're birthing in the hospital in all good faith, and for some reason, you know, you're suddenly confronted with having to have the interventions that you really didn't want to have.
Mm.
And this is where it's really great to have a support person
Yes.
with you, whether you feel very confident and you think, no, I'm just going to have my partner there, or not. Like, you know, follow your heart, but you can always ask your support person to wait out in the car or wait outside for hours if you feel like you don't actually want that after all. But things can take an unexpected turn, and it's really good to have someone there to really help process that. So sometimes people have a partner on board that's really kind of up with all that stuff, but in the end you have to make the decisions, and the decisions have to come from you. So you can have people mediating for you and attending to you, but they can't speak for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then,
That's
you
amazing.
know, if you don't have someone there, I would just highly recommend that beyond the birth, if it's something that's just really staying with you and you're finding it difficult to process, and you know, you keep replaying stuff and questioning stuff and you feel a little bit stuck, that it's really worthwhile getting someone to help you navigate through your experience, and you know, just tease apart the what ifs and help you process
Yes.
the trauma of the experience. And you know, whatever happens, the bottom line is that whatever happens, or what is happening or has happened, having really good company that's willing to listen and acknowledge the bigness of your experience is so profound, and it really reduces the amount of potential trauma, or the amount of trauma that you feel that you've experienced.
Right.
um,
Which would lead
and I,
into postnatal depression, I would guess. Like that would be the sort of like
yeah,
some of the root cause for most women is like not processing and dealing with the changes that had to happen that they weren't willing to accept,
yeah,
maybe, or yeah.
yeah. And then sometimes the actual process of pregnancy and birth kind of blows open this Pandora's box of previous things that weren't processed in
Mm.
life, that they didn't even perhaps know were there. You know, it wasn't like a denial. It was just like, oh, wow, I thought I dealt with that, or I didn't know that was still hanging
Yes.
around. But, you know, that all of the incredible changes in the body and the shape shifting that happens, and the extraordinary pressure of the baby coming through, it tends to unlock
Mm.
areas where we may have stored responses, you know, like tensions and patterns of response, and you know, like people call it emotional memory, but it's actually the way our body responds to those experiences, and it's like you can't hold them anymore. So you
Mm.
know, suddenly you're kind of dealing with something that's bigger, and that's a lot of what women go through. They just go like, I can't believe how big this experience was, and I don't know what's happening with me. And yeah,
Yeah.
and it can be mixed with all the joy and love and wonder of birth as well. So then it gets this really confused thing of, well, maybe that's just really normal to feel very overwhelmed, and sometimes it is, but it's like if anything goes on for a period of time and it's not changing, there's a stuckness and a preoccupation. Very, very important to get support.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
I think it's absolutely worth it, um, to pay for support, because a lot of the time in our cultures we don't want to do that, because we, you know, Aussies tend to feel like, oh yeah, we can deal with it, you know, like we'll be right.
Yes. You think there's like an underlying failure feeling, you know.
Yeah, or the underlying
Mm.
failure,
Yeah.
um, of not wanting to be acknowledged for something that you feel that you didn't do well or that might have been your fault. So there's either anxiety or grief, and sometimes just anger. Like sometimes people will just project it all back onto the system, or something that somebody said to them in birth, or somebody that wasn't perfect enough and made the whole experience shit, and it's like, it's just because they're overwhelmed and can't cope with the responsibility of their own choices, and in fact they weren't aware that they were going to get triggered into a passive response in hospital because they didn't realise they had an issue with authoritarian figures. And it was too late once it started to happen. So the more that a woman can know her own mind and body, great. And if she can't because it just didn't happen or didn't occur to her, then to be prepared to, there's some amazing support out there. And I think the other thing is that we're so used to having, all of our care paid for, that people get
absolutely.
People get a bit funny, like we're totally prepared to pay $2,000 to get our motor fixed in our car, or buy a new fridge or a new telly if we need one, or a new computer. But when it comes to spending a little bit of money on having some really beautiful sessions with somebody that's going to help unravel and calm your experience, and reduce the potential for trauma through your experience, people kind of get a bit, oh, but we probably don't really need that,
Yeah, I know. It's so true. And it is really crazy when you think about it, because if you don't give that to yourself, and if you continue to struggle and stay in that overwhelm, or it goes worse, and I actually heard a term this week twice now, which I've never heard of before, postpartum rage. Oh, no, postnatal rage or something. Yeah, I think it was, where I think mums direct their anger towards the child. So, if there's like flags, if there's like red flags, and you're not really wanting to invest that money or to, look for that help and support you need, then you're harming more than just yourself. Like your whole family is really, going to end up.
Absolutely. And not only your family, but society in general. And I think that happens a lot in our culture, where people just assume that everything should be okay because we have, good living and all the gadgetry, and we have state-of-the-art healthcare and medical services and that kind of thing. But it's like when you feel traumatized, whether it was because there was, people felt coerced about something and then regretted it later, or they just absolutely needed something and they can't resolve or discharge the energy, of that, the emotional energy of that experience. It's like people become very self-absorbed and unable to
move forward, isn't it? Yeah.
Like we all have the capacity to be creative and give. And really, if you've had an empowering birth experience, you feel like, how many women have empowering birth experiences and then just go, I just want to help other women now, even though you might have 3 or 4 little kids, you just want to give. Like, it just opens your heart, and you feel like you can make a really positive contribution to society. But when you're stuck in trauma, it's a very self-absorbed process, and it not only means that you can't expand out of that contraction that you're in, but it relies on other, you don't even want, you feel so sorry for yourself, you don't even want to involve other people. But when other people are involved, if you're just still going around in circles, after a time they're going to withdraw from you as well. So it's like it affects all of society when you can't claim that power and make an active contribution. And we all know stories of women who are still grieving for their miscarried babies or their stillborn babies 50 years after they were born, just because nobody wanted to talk with them about it, or they didn't see their child, or nobody acknowledged what a big deal it was to actually not only lose a child but go through birth and not be supported to recover from that. So it can be very, very simple support that makes a massive difference.
And you're right, there's a lot of people out there now who can help in that world. So it's not just like, oh, go and see a counsellor. You've got people like birth support, and there's coaches like myself, or there's even some midwives, or I was just thinking of there's actual doulas, postpartum doulas, isn't there? So there's a lot out there now. Like there's so much more support. Yeah, it's beautiful. Oh wow. Okay, so let me just check here. So it kind of goes into what we were just saying, but do you find that most women try to do things on their own, or maybe just rely on their partners, or a particular family member, rather than sort of reach out to the community? Like, is that what you're...
Yeah, I think we do, because we're so used to having the kind of nuclear family situation. But I think deep within us, like in our DNA, our ancestral DNA, that we kind of have that expectation that we're going to be supported.
Right, yes.
Supported, or we just feel like it'd be really great to be supported. And so even though we don't reach out, or many people don't reach out, what happens then is that it comes to be an expectation of the partner, or the mother-in-law, or whatever. And then there's this kind of real sense of disappointment often when the support is happening, but it's because we're so used to doing things in our own way. Like if we for those of us that live in big extended families, or a village situation where you've got other people's standards around you all the time, and other people's stuff, you don't have your kind of your precious house with everything arranged the way you want to have it arranged, and the way you fold the washing is a particular way, and you get really upset if somebody doesn't fold it the way that like all that sort of petty stuff. And it's because we're so used to doing things in our own way that we lose that ability to be gracious about any kind of support. But we also, coupled with that, is losing our ability to ask for help. Like it's that thing, getting back to that, if you feel like a failure if you can't do it on your own, or you feel like you should be able to do it all. Whatever. We're not exposed to other ways of being, and other ways of being supported enough to often make it feel like it's going to flow really smoothly, or just, and we can't have that expectation it's just going to happen when we live in nuclear families. We have to organise it,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it is. It's just like a bit of a silent expectation. Some. It's like you just sort of, of course they're going to join in or help or support because they're family.
They notice what I'm going through and everything I'm dealing with, like how come they haven't noticed? And it's like, well, they don't notice because they're not you.
Yeah.
And you have to learn to ask for what you want.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I remember when I was, sorry?
The asking in itself is really powerful. You might not always get what you want, but you got to learn to ask.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, well, I was 19, 3 months off being 20 when I had David in Sydney, and my mum and dad and family were all up in Mackay at that point. And my partner at the time, so for anyone who doesn't know, I had my first son with an ex-partner, and then like Liam and I together have got 4, so 5 children all up. But unfortunately, he wasn't very supportive, and nor was his dad and stepmom. So I was really on my own in Sydney. I didn't know anyone in my neighbourhood. A lady down the road from me did end up kind of reaching out to me, though she was quite, she really took me under her wing. She meant well, but she was very bossy and very, very controlling. And because I was young, I felt like I didn't really have a voice. And so that reaching out for that support, I just didn't know even where to go. I would be on the phone to my mum, and I remember Tresillian was a place that I think I rang a couple of times, but it was really quite a big deal actually. So and it's all been different for each birth, but all right, well, I think we're nearly out of time. So is there anything else that you'd like to share, Jen, before we go? It's been a beautiful conversation.
Like following on from that, it is a really good idea in pregnancy to organise some sort of postpartum support for yourself. And if you can't do that, to at least if you're able to, like particularly with the first baby, really take the rest for a few weeks very seriously. It's not always easy for women that have little ones, but if you have little ones, then organise your friends, get them around before the birth. Just say, look, these are the things that I think that I'm going to need support with. Who could actually help me with those particular things? And there could be a whole range of things like, you know, childcare, or bringing a friend round to play with your other child, or you know, it could be meals, it could be practical support like bringing your other children home from school, but to not be afraid to ask. And people might go, oh, I can't actually do that, but I can do this one. And then the other thing is, if people come round to visit you and they happen to say, is there anything I can do, just make sure you have something on the red, like, yes, I'd love you to just rub my feet, or could you please just strip the bed and put some fresh sheets on, or could you please just bring that bit of washing in, or clean my toilet, or, you know, like just one little task. And just give it to people, because if they say that, they're willing to help. And if they think it's a platitude, then they're going to be surprised that, oh, okay, there is something that I can do. And some people won't ask because they think they're intruding, you know. So then it's that, if you really need something to do and somebody hasn't even offered, then please learn to ask if there's something weighing you down. That and everybody then gets to enjoy the mother and the baby without just, you know, the glory of meeting the baby. It's like you're actually actively contributing something beautiful to their experience of staying well.
That's right.
And to really make sleep, know that you're going to be sleep deprived, but make sure that you get a chance to recover and not feel like you can get back to a normal social life within a month or two. Because your mental agility, and especially if you have a really empowered experience, you can just feel like, wow, I did that. I feel really amazing. I'm great, you know, like, and
get out there.
You can outstrip your physical, what's actually going on for you physically. So it's sort of finding ways not to go stir crazy, but to stay really with yourself and your baby while you recover, because you will, in the long run, you will do better if you really take it gently in the beginning, rather than try and do stuff in order to speed your recovery. It doesn't work that way with birth.
No, that's wonderful. I remember I was never in a hurry to be out there, actually. I think we really stayed insular for those first definitely 2 to 3 weeks. I just had no inclination to go out there. But I remember again with Davey, when I had him, I came home from hospital on day 5, and there was no food in the fridge or in the cupboards, and I had to go shopping the next day with this newborn, and I was I was dizzy, and so I just always remember that. So those other 4, I was just like, no, we're home. And those meal trains are beautiful. Like, people want, when people know that, I think it's when they know how they can help.
Yes.
So, you know, if they're not sure and they don't want to speak up or ask, but if you actually, like you said before, just give a specific little list, or say, look, there's just this task or this one, and then they know how then they can feel helpful, because we most, you know, pretty much all of us we do feel that we want to give, you know, that helps, and contribution is a important thing for people.
Yes.
So, and I had a family, beautiful family. She had about 6 daughters, I think, and it had more children than that. But they all came around after I had Zia, because my mum was sick with cancer at that point. And they all just cleaned the house for me. They just whipped around in an hour and did it all. And it was just the most amazing gift. To me, that was a more beautiful gift than a physical one, you know, like
you need that more than you need a bunch of flowers, and you need new extra baby clothes that you're not going to use, you know.
It was really special.
And even having like 3 or 4 friends that are willing to just, you know, one of them every day just check in on you with text or whatever, and the text is actually, how are you today, and is there anything that you need, which they may or may not be able to fulfill. But that's a really different experience to somebody ringing up and saying, oh, I'd really love to come round and meet the baby, and when can I do that, and it kind of feeling like, well, I'd love that too, but I don't know, I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed by everything. But when somebody's just walking with you, every day, and then you don't feel alone and isolated, and you know that there is a lifeline there for extra support should you need it. It's a really beautiful idea as well.
Yeah. Oh, Jenny, thank you. You are just so full of wisdom, and
Thanks,
you really are. No,
well,
just
it comes from all these amazing people that I've had the opportunity to work with and see what has worked with them and what hasn't worked with them, you know, and also lots of amazing teachers in my life. So
yeah. Oh, it's been absolutely beautiful. All right. Well, thank you. I'll end this here, and
yes.
well, I'll look forward to seeing you sometime soon.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye.